Hey guys, Jay here. Welcome to another cosplay tutorial. Today I'm showing you how to make this armor that I made for my Gambit cosplay from X-Men. So one thing to note right now, this is version 1. There will be a version 2 that comes out the week after this video. And that video will show you a different method on how to make a similar type of chest plate. It's the same character, it's still Gambit, so it'll still look similar, but it's going to be a different way to do this. This one has where it's popped out, there's pieces on here and then a skin over it. The other method, which is actually over there, is not like that. It's completely different in how it's made. So that way when that video comes out, you have both options and you can make it however way you decide. Also, one more thing to note, I do not have a pattern for this, and that is because I couldn't make a pattern for this. This is kind of just made out of nothing. I kind of just guessed on the pattern, and I did it a few times on paper, held it up to me until I got it right. And then the rest of it is made the way you see in the video. So sadly, there's nothing I can do about that, but I can tell you how to get a pattern for it. So what you're going to do is, the way I know of, is you may need help with this. You're going to cover yourself in saran wrap wherever you want the armor to be, and then cover that in a layer of duct tape. Try to make it only one layer. If you're male or can have a shirt off or whatever, it's easier to do that because then you can cut it off of you without cutting your clothing. Or if you want to use crappy clothing that you can cut up, you can do that too. But it's really hard to get that cut off of you without cutting into clothing. So just know that. And you draw it on you or have somebody else do it for you. And then you can just take that off, cut the pieces up and use that as a pattern. And that is what that's what I was going to do with this one. But again, I couldn't do that, so I just guessed. But anyway, I should really get into the tutorial on how to make it. As I mentioned in the intro, I do not have a pattern for this, and I start the video after the base layer is already cut out. You'll have to figure that out on your own, all the measurements and stuff, because even if I had a pattern, the chances that you're the exact same size as me to allow it to fit you is unlikely. So you'd have to do all that yourself anyway. You can do this with help from somebody if needed, by wrapping yourself in a plastic wrap, like the kind you use to cover food with, and then duct tape on top of that, and draw the design out while it's on you, and then cut that off, and use it as a template. I made this one out of 2 pieces, a left and a right, and glued it down the center using contact cement. Which, by the way, just so you know, contact cement is the only glue that I used on this entire project. So anytime that I mention glue, that's what I used. It's also good to know 2 things here. 1, please wear a respirator with this glue, as it lets off fumes that you do not want to breathe in. And 2, you'll want to use at least 2 coats of glue each time because the foam will soak up most of the first layer. I used the crappiest of the blue tapes that I have to make a layer on the base piece here, I don't know what to call this, and then I used good masking tape on top of that, as I don't have cheap duct tape with me right now, but this layer will stick better, and then I can draw out the chest plate. And I do the exact same thing for the abs. Also, I use the blue tape against the foam because it's barely sticky, so it won't rip up the foam taking it off. The other layer of masking tape sticks way harder, and actually usually rips this kind of foam really easily. But since the blue tape doesn't even stick to itself that well, I needed this masking tape layer in order to make sure that the pattern doesn't peel apart when I try and remove it from the foam. I traced the muscle detail patterns onto 6mm foam, and when I cut them out, I cut at a very large angle. I have the tip pointing into the center of the piece, and this is hard to explain. But you can kind of see what I'm doing in the video. When you flip the pieces over, they now have a bevel on all of the sides, kind of like a blade bevel or something. And I do this on all of the edges of every single piece except for the top of the chest pieces, because there's other details that are going to go right there. But doing this will create valleys between each of the pieces, so that the top layer that I'm going to get to in a moment will go into those areas and create the muscle detail that will show through. You can see here what I mean by that. The 2 chest pieces in the center make a valley. When the top layer goes on, this will make it look like one piece with raised detailing as the muscles. Also, you can make these details look however you want. You don't have to follow my exact look. Now I just need to glue the pieces on. I first had them all taped down to make sure where I liked them and what I had and everything, and then I traced them out so that I knew where to put the glue, but I ended up just covering the entire surface of the base with glue instead, because my original idea was to go over the entire thing afterwards with 2mm foam on top of the muscle details. but that didn't work out how I wanted it to, so I went with another thing that, again, I'll get into in a moment. But yeah, I just glued all the pieces down where I wanted them to go. You'll also notice that the armor has a vertical curve where the center wasn't straight when I glued it, and that was on purpose. But it makes it easier for the glue and whatever, to dry and all the pieces on there without them wanting to pull away from each other if I reverse that. So I push it in. And then once it was completely cured, I can put it back to the way it normally goes, which you can see here. As I said, I did something else for the top layer, so let's get into that now. The 2mm foam method wouldn't do what I was trying to do, and refused to go into the valleys between the muscle details. So I ended up buying some pleather in a color that was as close as I could get. I'll link this stuff in the materials section at the bottom of the description, but you can use whatever you want. This stuff is only 0.08mm thick, which is way thinner than the foam. And it's a bit stretchy, which also helps. However, just know that this is also hard to get into place, and took some work off camera, since my body had to be over it, covering the camera, while trying to force it to work. But I used contact cement in about 4 or 5 layers on the back of the fabric, because it actually soaked it up a lot worse than the foam does, as well as 2 more coats on the foam, since the previous glue was already dried up by this time, and the fabric doesn't stick right away. It actually took about 2 days to fully cure and stick for good, so you have a lot of working time to peel it back up and force it into the valleys, which this is exactly what I did. And that's why foam didn't work, because it didn't have time to allow for those fixes because it stuck right away. Putting the fabric on was a pain in the butt, but I got it to work. Just go slow, and remember you have some working time just like I mentioned. You can see at first I kept trying to press and stretch the leather down into the valleys, and it sort of worked, but it needed more than that. I even tried pressing it with a pen on its side, and even that wasn't working like I wanted. So I peeled it back up off camera just enough to maneuver it into place better, which worked out just fine. And it did end up with some wrinkles at the very end of the build, but honestly, I don't really mind. I wanted it to look more like leather anyway, because it seems more like that in the cartoons and stuff, and I don't really like the look of the really stiff metal or 3D prints anyway, so there's that. I also had to cut darts into the excess around it so that I could pull the fabric around the back. I also didn't add any glue to the collar section above the chest muscles because I didn't want the fabric sticking there. I did put glue on the top side of the chest muscles so the fabric could be cut down and then wrap around that edge, and this will actually be hidden under the collar detail. For the little line details on the collar, I just used strips of 2mm foam and put them kinda wherever I felt like. This is my own thing. Shut up. Anyway, these are about 1 3/4 inch wide, somewhere around there, and I cut them to be more than long enough, and then just cut them down at the neckline. And here's what my pattern looks like. I based it off of another cosplay that I saw on Google, but I still kinda did my own thing here. The whole idea was to do that. For the piping detail that goes around the edge and the neckline of the collar section, I actually made them before I put the fabric on, while I was waiting for the fabric to arrive. The one that butts up against the fabric is just some 10mm foam dowel, and I even went to the trouble of doing those little sections where it looks like there's panel line details or whatever on the piping. You can do this wherever you want and not follow mine, but the way you do it is you just cut it where you want that to be, then you lightly sand around the edges to round it off, and then glue it back together. Bam! Panel lines. The neckline one though is a 10mm half dowel, so they come already like this from the factory, but they're the dowel, but they're cut down their length so that it's in half. It's a half circle if you look at it from the side. I don't know. The bottom piping detail, I originally wanted to use the same 10mm foam dowels so that it matched, but I didn't know that contact cement just apparently peels right off of this fabric. I originally just glued it directly to the bottom, and it just peeled right back up. So instead, I had to use 20mm half dowels, as that's all I have, since I don't have enough 10mm half dowel left after using it on the neck. I knew I couldn't glue this directly to the fabric, and the edge that I tried before is actually cut at an angle, so there isn't enough surface area to do anything else there. So I cut into the fabric and the foam underneath just a little bit, and I really cut up the fabric, like a lot. I need to do this so the glue can seep down through the cuts in the fabric to reach the foam underneath so that it can't peel back up this time. I then glue on 3 sections of the half dowel directly onto the front and hope it works. Luckily, it does. Also, you can see here how I cut up the dowel so that the 2 sharp corners under the abs worked out without looking weird. Now that the build itself is done, I have to form everything to fit around my body. I did everything else while it was flat because it was way easier. To form it, you usually would use heat, but this is a little big for that. And I wanted it to stay that way. So I glue a strip on the back, but when doing so, I bend the entire side to curve it while it's gluing in. I do this with the piece going lengthwise left to right, and doing this while gluing it down will keep it in the curve. I do the exact same thing to the collar on the arms that will go over my shoulders, as well as another piece inside the back of the chest just to help that part look a little nicer. All the straps are just 4mm foam. You can make them whatever width you want, and then just make them the length that you need to glue inside the armor and overlap a little bit behind you. I then cut a few strips of Velcro, which just so happened to be all I had left. I literally used the rest of what I had. I then glued 3 strips down onto the foam, and weirdly contact cement works really good with this polyester backed Velcro. And I always try to use this kind whenever I can, so if you need some, buy that kind. For the collar, I did the exact same thing, but the straps were longer and not as wide. These are about 1 3/4 inch wide, and off camera, after I glued them to the collar, I figured out in front of a mirror where they fell against the back straps and then marked them with my thumbnail, weirdly enough, which I was able to match up later, and then I could cut them down and glue them into place. I glued these to the outside of the waist straps, but I also wrapped them around the bottom edge just for a better hold. Almost done! I used paper and masking tape to tape off the entirety of the fabric section and covered the collar and the bottom trim with black Plastidip Spray. I'm keeping the base of the collar black and only painting the lines and piping, so I don't even have to do anything to that. And now I use silver paint on the parts that I said were going to be silver. Now I want to rant real fast. This is also something really good to know for yourself. Silver paint is the worst paint on the planet. I don't know if it works differently when it's in the tube. You know, you can see those ones where it's similar to how you get toothpaste out where you press it. But in these bottles, silver is a huge waste of money. Never buy more than just 1 at a time if you can. And I swear, if you leave this stuff for like 5 minutes, with the bottle still closed and everything, it's ruined and needs to be thrown out immediately. The only time I've ever had silver paint be not so watered down to the point of being nearly unusable is immediately right after I buy it. Like that day. If I wait until the next day, it'll be so thinned out that I can barely use it. This paint job took me hours to do. This should have taken 30 to 45 minutes. I put some paint in the holder thing, and you're only seeing this first part of me doing this, but I put the paint in the holder and then closed it up and started painting and everything with it. And then after I was done with what you see right now, I didn't like how thin it was. So I stopped the camera and took the bottle and shook it continuously for like 15 minutes non-stop, and then opened it and poured it back into one of the other sections of the paint holder, and it was as if nothing changed. It was just as thin and watery as it was before shaking it for 15 minutes. When I first bought it, it was not this thin. So you can either buy silver paint in the tubes and hope they work, or just buy the bottles the same day you plan to use it and plan to finish the silver painting that same day, or else you'll probably have to throw it out and buy more paint. So it really sucks, but whatever, rant over. Anyway, the thing's completely done now, and I'm not even going to clear coat this. I only have spray clear coat, and I don't want it to crack. This thing needs as much flexibility as I can get out of it, which is why I used acrylic brush-on paints and Plastidip Spray, all of which are way more flexible. Alright, so that is how I made my new Gambit armor for my new cosplay from X-Men. There's not much to say, so I'm just going to end this right here. So, if you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys later.